So he's explaining the real milchama, the depth of the milchama of the Yevonim. As he mentioned yesterday, it's also in one of the orders. Look at the order 34 of order 34 capsules. What we mentioned, that is v'chein le'idach. You see it there, order 34. Sheskimu gam al kina mitzvah dechukim. On the more surface level, so the Yevonim, the Greeks were against chukim because they're super rational. But the mitzvahs that are rational, they weren't so against. However, he explains that even the chukim, they were maskim. They agreed that a Jew should observe chukim. However, mitzadzeh shaseichel machayiv. Why does he keep the chukim? He doesn't know the reason, but his intellect tells him sheyesh leminyonim shelamayim aseichel. And this is already a big chiddush. If intellect, even if you acknowledge there are things that are higher than intellect, but that intellect itself acknowledges its own limit, as long as it's rationalized, even with the seichel acknowledging its own limitations, that there must be infinite. My intellect understands the concept of infinite. It's in mathematics. So that they agreed. Is v'snagdusam gam l'mitzvahs elo, so their opposition to these mitzvahs soisa are actually kaim v'oisim mitzvah b'tzinach. Their war is that the simple emunah that defies starts to be beyond seichel, in the sense that seichel is machayiv, it is beyond seichel, but truly beyond seichel, namely that it's simply yorotz in simple language. As long as there is some gain, there's some satisfaction, intellectual or the intellect to recognize that there's some things that are beyond, so it happily embraces it. As long as there's some gain, fine. Do it only because God said. That was the whole war. So then we started learning in the Pnim, back to Isdalad, that even Eidos and Mishpatim, a Yid has to keep because they're Ratzon Hashem, just like Chukim. And that's not only because that's the proper attitude, that even though you understand the reason, you should still do it as a loyal servant, not based on the rationale. But more than that, this is not only this that a Yid, even Eidos and Mishpatim should do as an Eved. It's not only a reflection of what his attitude should be, but it's the truth of the mitzvahs themselves. Namely, even those mitzvahs that come to us and we understand them, their premise is really higher than reason. It's just that they were enclosed in the trappings, descending through Ishtalshalos, as the Rotzen Atzmi of Hashem descends through Ishtalshalos. So the mitzvahs assume this form of rationale, Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod, the four elements. It's not unlike the Neshamas. What's the difference between Neshamas? What is he saying? Some mitzvahs are more enclosed in Seichel and others are not. So here's the paradox, before I get to Neshamas. See, this actually explains reasons for the classic chukim. Profound reasons. Classic chukim, paraduma, and shatnez. Shatnez is the root of shatnez is mixing the balance of chesed and gevurah. That's a very profoundly logical thing, and you need a balancing universe. Music has to have each instrument play its own part. A symphony, the instruments have to be unique and distinct, and only there lies harmony. And so to mix chesed and gevurah to upset the balance of the universe, that's what shatnez, the root of it is, wool and linen. Wool comes from an animal, and then it comes from the ground. Crossbreeding. Even Paraduma Chassidus explains the difference being that the explanations given in Chassidus and Kabbalah for shatnez, for example, Paraduma, they're just in general, marginal, general idea, not much of the specifics. All to say, and at what level at more a Kabbalah level, as if to say the Ratzon Atzmi descended to Atzilus. Obviously it did, because it comes down to us in words, in definition, in words and halachas, and then the derech ma'ivir, it descends through the lower oilemus, not assuming the oilemus's limitations. Not unlike the neshamas. Wherein lies the distinction between one level of neshama and the other? I'll explain in Tanya. All come from Chachmasi Yisborach, and even higher than that, Chelik L'Kamer Mal Mamash. The difference is explained in the neshama's descent. In the descent through the worlds, in simple language, there's derech ma'ivir. One passes through, and then there's descending into a world and assuming its entire limitation. Begashmi is a simple external, simple marshal Gashmi. A person can live in a society and still retain, comes from another town. So one person lives there, he adapts to the society, and he functions in it. Still keeps his culture, his accent, his attitudes remain unaffected, even though he's engaged in a society that's very different from his own. And then another person quickly adapts and suddenly becomes part of that culture. So the neshamas descend through ishtalshalus. The higher neshamas don't assume the culture of the lower elementals. They come into the guf, but derech ma'ivir. They're there, they travel, they send, and they descending means you have to respect the limitations where you are, because you're engaging them, but not b'pnimius, only b'chitzonius. So the same is true of mitzvahs. Some mitzvahs descend b'pnimius through ishtalshalus, assuming the profound tzir of the oilamos, so they have pshat and them as drush and sod in a very elaborate way. And other mitzvahs come b'derech ma'ivir, and therefore there are explanations, Chassidus says, because it did go through ishtalshalus. So Chassidus will explain some level explanation to chukim, but it's b'derech, it's based on kloli and etc. Ethereal, more transcendent explanations. But all the mitzvahs, all of them, are rooted where? In the Ratzon Hashem, His pure will, which is the Ma'alim Mitam. There's no reason to have this will. He chose to have this will. Continuing now. V'lo yo'id. And moreover, that's talking about the pnimis of each mitzvah, that the pnimis of each mitzvah is really higher than rationale, completely like God is. Again, there's no reason for God's existence, God forbid. So too, his will for mitzvahs is a Ratzon Atzmi. Again, just to mention something we mention all the time, but it's important to make this distinction. There is no reason for why God created. Yisab HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not a reason. Yisab HaKadosh Baruch Hu is simply telling us what he wants. But why do you want that? There's fundamentally no answer to why you want that. There's no, because any reason would then say, there's a gain. This is why. Here's his gain. And every reason also implies time. Every reason implies time. It wasn't. It's happening. Then what is going to give you? Which is beyond time. And he creates reason. Yesh ma'ayin. It's absolutely nothing. So when we get all these so-called reasons that Chassidus and Kabbalah brings to creation, they're not reasons in. That's the rationale that motivated. That's what he was missing. He's missing dir b'tachtonim. Nonsense. He was just missing nothing.
But that itself is the reason, right? He wants it. It's a semantic.
You have to be careful in reason, as in reason in our world, because reason in our world is at the end means fundamentally what's the reason is asking what's the gain. Reason means what's the gain. And there's no gain for the Eibishter. It's a free choice. So what we're telling is, this is telling us what the purpose is. Why does he need this purpose? There's fundamentally no answer. Just the point of, even though Chassidus uses language of time, there's the time Abriya and the time did it b'tachtonim. But you don't mean time in the conventional sense. Okay. And moreover, till now we're speaking about the source of the mitzvahs. Ratzon Atzmi b'chira, word he used, shekach goz HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So he decreed. Moreover, shekam time by mitzvahs, even the reasons. They're true reasons. So here we're talking about Chochmah, Datzilus, and even higher. True Chochmah. The Eibishter's Chochmah is totally beyond human intellect. His Chochmah bound up with him. Chochmah Datzilus, and even higher. The highest levels of Chochmah totally beyond creation. And they're infinite. Since his wisdom, his Chochmah is infinite, and especially as we learn in Tanya, that Hashem is thoroughly united with his Chochmah. Chochmah of Atzilus is the pure expression of the Ein Sof, like Kerech and Poyel. The Ein Sof is infinite possibility and chooses to express itself in Chochmah. It's still one of its infinite possibilities, and that infinite property is not lost on this Chochmah expression. So therefore, it's obvious, impossible that the finite seichel of created beings, yuchel hasig, and mitzvahs, hatam dan mitzvahs. We can't even grasp the tam. I'm not talking the rotzen now. The tam as it's manifested in the Chochmah. So to be precise in our language, the tam is beyond us. The rotzen is beyond. He writes in Tanya that the reasons of the mitzvahs are not revealed to us because they can't be. They're beyond the parameters of our rationale. He says in Tanya, and even in some places where it's come down all the way, and some reason is explained, which would appear is understood to us. This is after many tzimtzumim. That's not the tachlis of the tam, of the Chochmah. Right? Shlomo Melech has to get 3,000 mashalim, mashal after mashal, to explain the tam of the mitzvahs he grasped it. And this, that the reason that we have is not the ultimate reason, moving gam b'seichel anushi, our own intellect can appreciate that that would be the case. Shari gam seichel anushi mevin b'pashtus, even human intellect understands that human intellect cannot grasp infinite Chochmah. On the contrary, and in those places where some explanation is offered to us, as it were, it's a great pella. It's a great pella that the Eibishter would do that. But chesed Hashem, it's Hashem's kindness, that our intellect should have some understanding. And even after, because of God's grace and chesed. So therefore, so there's some explanation that's revealed to us at Yidua. Even that, it's known, Shatam Morak al Klolos HaMitzvahs, all the explanations that we give are just for the general mitzvah. They don't address the specific myriads of details to the mitzvah. That if the details would be otherwise, wouldn't change the general meaning of the mitzvah. So why is it dafka this parat? And the more specific you get, the more specific, the less it's related to the rationale of the mitzvah. So we can see in the pratim that is, they express actually the Ratzon Atzmi, like this and not another way. No reason. The reason is the Klola saying it. When we say pratim, we also mean in specific cases. There are cases where the mitzvah wouldn't apply. I've given you the possible illustration. The most obvious and logical mitzvah is not to murder. It's the most obvious mitzvah that every society has to respect, otherwise it unravels. So here's a scenario in halacha where it makes no sense. What's the case? I told you the scenario. There's two people in a room, an old man who wants to die, who's a miserable person, where everybody hates legitimately because he made other people's life miserable all of his life, and he has no regret. He was a landlord, never gave anybody a break, never gave any tzedakah, and he was sinful, not observant, and no regret, and he's sick with a terminal illness. He's 120, 119 and 364 days, and he wants to die. He's in pain physically, and he's screaming, "Kill me." And in this room is a young mother, a paragon of virtue, and young children who need her. I could elaborate to get the picture. She's beautiful on every level. And a person comes in with holding a gun with two guns. And there's a fourth person in the room. And he gives a gun to the fourth person, and he says, "Kill." Look at the scenario here. There's one person that's going to die here. The country gives the gun to the woman, the young woman. He tells her, "You kill this old man, or I'm going to kill you. Just someone's going to die here. The old man's going to die, or she's going to die." There's no Hollywood ending. And he's saying, "Kill me." So what does logic say? Of course he should die and she should live. Can't do it. Completely defies all logic. Because they're moving, we're 3/4 way down through Dalit. From all this is understood, that even the Eidos Mishpatim, as they're manifested, he's saying, with their timing, their primus de ketam is beyond us, and therefore they're like chukim relative to us. In brackets, we keep it gam time and mitzvahs. Since the reasons, even the reasons, his chachmas is beyond seichel nevroim. So that's the timing. We say to him, so moreover, so we're saying Shem Ritzinecha. That's beyond us. Ritzinecha is beyond. Ritzinecha is Baruch, Shalamayne gam chachmas is Baruch. They're his will, his chosen will, that are higher than Chachma. The Ratzon is this labish in Chachma. Then why should there be Chachma? Maybe she chose to manifest Chachma says Baruch, in which he invests his will. So the Ratzon is utterly beyond the Chachma. Conclusion. So this is the meaning of the Ivanim wanted that we should transgress Chukei Ritzenecha. Literally, the Havira means to remove them. It's even Eidos Mishpatim. They wanted to uproot this godly sense that we have in observing all of the mitzvahs. Namely, number one, that his chachma is beyond human intellect, and that's la'aviro mechukei. As you said before, that they're chukim, those mitzvahs that have reasons, are chukim relative to us because their reasons are beyond us. And the next thing, ritzinecha. And certainly to uproot that all mitzvahs at their root are beyond even chachmasi yizbarech but ritzinach. That was the whole milcham. So now we'll understand. I say, yeah. Lashon HaGemara, the precise language of the Gemara, which says, when Yevanim enter the Heichel, they contaminated all the oils. It doesn't say they entered the Heichel and they contaminated, which imply two things. They contaminated the Heichel, they contaminated the Shemani. The implication is the whole Kavon is the Shemani. The Mashmois Alosh, all the inferences, going to the Heichel and Ishtadlu, that the effort was, this was their goal. When his Amtzor, they invested great energy, the Tamis Hashemani. Where's the oil? That was the question. Where is the oil? To Mitamid. In order to defeat Eden. Because Heichel is Bina. It's from the Zoya, the Nekuda Beichola. Nekuda Beichola, Nekuda is Chachma, and Heichel is the chamber, expanding the Nekuda. So Heichel is Bina, Vishemen is Chachma, and Shemen is Chachma. Shalamayim HaSeichel de Bina, Hayden Seichel de Bina. Canal Sigbesh, Shemen Rebechinas Kodesh, Shemen is called Shemen Mishchas Kodesh, and the Zoya says that Kodesh means meal of something, Begarmei on its own, it's removed completely from creation. Malachim, what do they want to do? Timu, again, Kol Hashmanim Shebeheichel. They want to contaminate the oil in the Heichel. Timu Hashmanim Shebeheichel the Bina. They wanted to contaminate the Shmanim, the oil that is in the Heichel of Bina. Even those that there is Bina, if there's understanding, they want to contaminate, and that Yidden should not observe it with the sense of it's Chachmose Yisbarach and Ritzone Yisbarach. In your Bina, in your understanding, to contaminate your understanding. In order to carry out their nefarious desire, what should it be? Should only be mitzat seichel. We're clear? Yeah? Ois vav. So how do we overcome? How are we victorious over this battle? So you can't meet this with rationale. And it can't even be a Mesiras Nefesh, which is rational. And that is bound with Tamadas, meaning, in brackets, as I said before, there's levels of transcendence that intellect also is masculine that exists. It's infinite. And from infinite, there is drawn finite. So there's that a relative infinite. And infinite, actually in the very word infinite, conveys the notion. It's not finite, which bears the relationship to finite. So it means there's some level of seichel, not direct. It's not chiyuv but shlila. Yediyas chiyuv means when you have an affirmative understanding of something. Yediyas shlila is when you can know what it's not. It's also seichel. So classic infinite is seichel. And that's the word that we use. We say not finite, you're saying something. It's not a direct description, it's indirect, but it's still addressing it. That's called makiv dechaya. That's a transcendence that's measured by its transcendence of something finite. Sevev kalalna, makiv akodiv, a close or near transcendent level. You cannot fight this klippa with that level of conviction or connection because there's no resistance there. Fine. As long as you're bounded, tethered in some way to intellect, that's okay. You haven't really touched the likus b'pnimi, so we don't care. If that's your God, worship it. No problem. And Eibishter, that is the Mailam, that's just totally beyond the parameters of intellect, even indirectly beyond the classic infinite, that's where the battle is. So Mekivin Shetim was called Hashman Shebeichel. Since what did they do with the metama or the shmonim? Haino, what did they do? What was where were their poison arrows addressed? Gam ben yonim shekedush lememayim metami das. Even kedusha, which is higher than tam v'das, that's the shemen shebeichel. But it's akshurim in tam v'das. It's connected. That's okay. Contaminating it means that's fine. So therefore, that's not where you're going to fight them, because there's no fight. We're best of friends right there. The whole milcham has to be dafke mesiras nefesh, true mesiras nefesh, not a rational mesiras nefesh. It's worth it, because Gan Eden awaits me. Or this talks about Avraham, why is mesiras nefesh was so pure? Because you can have mesiras nefesh and you're going to further the cause. There's a rationale. People will see this and be inspired. My life wasn't in vain. Here, the whole mesiras nefesh there was he's killing Yitzchak. Nobody sees it. No one's going to believe it. Even God told you. He's ruined everything he stood for. There's no heir. Hashem promised him. And he's still ready to do it. That's a mesiras nefesh where there's no gain. On the contrary, you're undermining everything that you lived for and taught. That's true mesiras nefesh. The Eibishter geheist, the Gemalno. It's the deal mesiras nefesh, and like the time of Hanukkah. Somebody's going to say the point. When they went to war, they didn't think they're going to win.
Could you say because they didn't think they were going to win that at that time at least there was no place in Torah for the mesiras nefesh? It was
not even a place in Torah for us. Yeah. You know, mesiras nefesh. Yeah. We are mid betoykif neged kol hamonim ma'akvim. Mesiras nefesh is to stand against intensity, against all that which holds and prevents and holds back. Toykif atzmi, an essential tkifus shalamaylim haseichel agam, completely heightened seichel.
Pinchas almost like they went and asked the Rabbi and said, can we go to war? The Rabbi would have said no.
Yeah, that's not, yeah, in a way, but he knew the halacha. There's a halacha that says, Moishe taught it to them. There's a lot of rationale there too. I mean, people were seeing this on the back precedent, mesiras nefesh, but Avraham says that's quintessential one. Is there? I mean, it's just pointless, destroys everything he built. No one's going to believe it. It's madness. The emphasis that people struggle with it. They can't. My brother in Atlantis, he had the Pasha Lech Lecha on Zoom. He had a program where he invited modern Orthodox. The topic was the Akedah. So modern Orthodox view, the Litvish view, and Chassidus. So the modern Orthodox view, I mean, I apologize, I don't mean to insult anybody here, but I'm just going to tell you as it is. So he was told before we're very rational. So it's very, very rational, not as rational. It's a very intellectual, rigorously intellectual approach, which is preparing you for our approach. And so the person's with charts and color coded in the text. And here's the conclusion. Here's the brilliant conclusion that if you notice, after the Akedah, we don't find any more conversations between Avraham and Yitzchak. Nothing's recorded in the Torah, which means Yitzchak was courageous and didn't forgive his father, and they probably shouldn't have done it. Exactly.
He went Yosef disagreed.
Huh?
When Yosef was taken, he spoke to Yitzchak, tried to comfort him.
And Chumash itself, Yitzchak and Yaakov talking about Avraham and Yitzchak. Avraham and Yitzchak talking after the Akedah, they never talk again. They're brothers. Right, that's cool. Brilliant. Anyway, but the point is that even these observant Jews and Kol HaKavod, people grapple with this. It's a touchy subject. And many people say, if God would tell me, I would not do it. You want to kill my son, you kill him. I'm not doing it. I mean, you do it. I'm just not doing it. And some people argue that whatever, he should have said no. And it's complete. I'm just telling you, that's how sensitive this is. That's why it's true mesiras nefesh, because it's completely incomprehensible. Give up your own life and furthering the cause. I mean, many people, sacrifice, but there's a gain, this world, the next world, there's a message, the inspiration. Freedom is worth dying for. It's worth dying for liberty rather than live enslaved. Millions went, ready to die on the battlefield for a just cause. What they believe is a just cause. That's not Mesiras Nefesh. Mesiras Nefesh is his Teikef Atzmi. Shalamayim Maseichel Agam. The Gemara, like he says, will conclude here Mesiras Nefesh. Al Kiddush Hashem. The true Mesiras Nefesh ain't mitzad eza svara sichlis. It's not because of any gain. Kim sheyevshel klal li's b'v'nach. It just can't be any other way. The Rebbe said, no, it's no. Zer bo mitzad ha'искashus. That's the Menashama. Where does it come from? The emissary of the paradox is that where does this come from? It comes from Etzem Menashama. It can't be any other way. It's higher than a choice, really. In the end, there's a miyid. It's who I am. I just can't do this. Chines yechida. Ina iskashus atzmis hu she'efshe klal lis beif and acha chas v'shalom. Iskashus atzmis means that it can't be any other way. The truth is, in the end, there's no choice at all. There's no choice at all. I'm miyid. Okay, to be continued, Mitzvah Shem, further tomorrow.